Well, as everybody knows, inventory is the second largest expense on the P&L, right? And so it's a huge contributor. And when you break it down, P&L is primarily going to be revenue minus labor minus COGS, and you get everything else. Revenue, most of our hospitals are running into a bit of a ceiling, right? Not a lot of elasticity left in pricing associated with customers starting to push. You've got to add capacity and volume to be able to try to grow that top line. Pricing's tough. Labor, the first largest expense, is highly competitive. You have to compete, and so being able to constrain labor, the only real way to do that on the P&L and expense side is to add efficiencies to the organization, get more out of the input. But honestly, vet medicine inventory management is just wrought with waste, inefficiencies. So wasted time, wasted money, wasted product.
Welcome to the Veterinary Blueprint Podcast, brought to you by Butler Vet Insurance, hosted by Bill Butler. The Veterinary Blueprint Podcast is for veterinarians and practice managers who are looking to learn about working on their practice instead of in their practice. Each episode, we will bring you successful, proven blueprints from others both inside and outside the veterinary industry. Welcome to today's episode.
Welcome to this episode of the Veterinary Blueprints Podcast. Today, we're diving into what every successful veterinary hospital should have in mind, and that is operations. And we're grateful to have Emmitt Nantz. He's a co-founder of Inventory Ally and a huge advocate for streamlining veterinary practice processes to improve client and patient care. He's got a strong foundation of inventory management and operational efficiency, and he helps simplify the chaos behind the scenes so that teams can focus on what they do best, which is delivering excellent care. So if you're a practice manager or owner, you're definitely going to want to listen to this podcast. Welcome, Emmitt.
Thank you, Bill. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
So why don't you give us a little background on you and your career in animal health and how you wound up co-founding Inventory Ally?
Golly, how much time do we have? I've been in the industry for a while. 2 minutes. I've been in vet med operations for 20 years. I started while I was doing my executive MBA course. I started by managing a couple different locations at Banfield. That led me to over a decade of doing large-scale process improvement projects for that network. So was fortunate enough. Very large, over 1,000 hospitals.
Wow.
One of those projects was inventory management. Another one was just changing probably 80 to 85% of the flow in the hospital that happened in the course of a day. Really pivoted the whole organization's plan of attack to improve capacity, average transaction, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction. So it was all focused on Lean Six Sigma type of design. When I left Banfield, I joined a company called SmartFlow, which a lot of listeners should be familiar with. It's digital patient flow management with Dr. Ivan Zak. We were able to join that to IDEX's software suite of services, and I spent 3.5 years there managing software onboarding and customer success for all of their products like Cornerstone, Neo, DB Max, a variety of other things. So I've always been in operational improvement and I believe very strongly in the people of veterinary medicine, and I like to be able to help them out. I often say I'm passionate about people who are passionate about pets.
Cool. Well, that's our focus as well at Butler Vet Insurance. And before we hopped on, I'm sure we'll chat about this. You're a big traction guy, Gino Wickman. If you're in that world, one of our prior podcast guests had a practice in Tennessee, and they are a big EOS traction. And I think from an operational perspective, I've got my just to grab it. I've got my vision organizer right here for Butler Vet Insurance and our operations, and it really gives you some of that operational guidance at a 30,000 foot level, and then you get into some of that granular stuff. So we'll dive into that as well. But I want to start with inventory because that's your current gig is Inventory Ally. And from a practice perspective, cost of goods and inventory, they have stuff. Where do you see the hidden power of inventory within a practice? I think that's something that they struggle with.
Well, as everybody knows, inventory is the second largest expense on the P&L.
Okay.
And so it's a huge contributor. And when you break it down, like the P&L is primarily going to be revenue minus labor minus COGS, and you get everything else. Revenue, most of our hospitals are running into a bit of a ceiling, right? Not a lot of elasticity left in pricing associated with customers starting to push back on some of that.
You just have to keep adding DVMs and exam rooms if you want to expand. That's all you can do, right?
You've got to add capacity and volume to be able to try to grow that top line. Pricing's tough. Labor, the first largest expense, is highly competitive. You have to compete, and so being able to constrain labor, the only real way to do that on the P&L and expense side is to add efficiencies to the organization, get more out of the input. But honestly, vet medicine inventory management is just wrought with waste, inefficiencies. So wasted time, wasted money, wasted product. And that's why I chose to focus there, because hospitals, to be able to succeed and grow, there's a lot of opportunity there. The two things that really drive that opportunity is you have technicians or CSRs most of the time doing inventory
Sure.
instead of seeing patients. So there's an opportunity cost of that time spent. Plus,
Well,
it's not
now
the
you're
expertise.
putting labor costs into inventory costs, and
That's
the
right.
two largest expenses on the P&L are competing with each
compound.
other instead of working with each other.
That's right. And you've got a team that's working on inventory and not seeing patients, then you're not only spending the money here, but you're not making the
You're
money there.
degrading the revenue number.
That's right. That's right. And then we also recognize that what's really important is that we recognize that veterinary medicine is a service business. Right? The power of the long-term success of the business is customers come back and refer their friends. They only do that if they have a good experience. That's
Sure.
where we need to focus our attention. When it comes to inventory management, though, most hospitals are trying to use a combination of PIMS and pull tags and Excel sheets and a variety of things that really treats inventory like this is a retail environment. We're trying to figure out, how did I buy it, sell it, replace it? But it's so complex because the variables associated with inventory consumption is I use some in hospital, I use variation within service packages. We just break it down into smaller points than just bottles. So a lot of complexity. You put those two things together, the training and the diversion of labor and the complexity of it, there's a lot of opportunity to get better. So
And
that's
I
why
just went
focus
to
there.
school to be a vet tech. I didn't go to school to manage inventory.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Now, we've got a lot of inventory managers in the industry who are really good.
Sure.
Generally a type A personality. They've built a very specific system to enable it, and they're really good at it. But oftentimes that means that they're stuck in that role.
Sure. Well, what happens
Hard
when
for
they
them
leave
to take
then, right?
vacation.
You're in big trouble.
Big trouble. Even taking vacation, they get emails and texts and phone calls about we're out of this, we're out of that. So yeah, we really work hard to simplify that and make it predictable.
So inventory is a big, it's a second cost of goods or second line item on the P&L. And so, from an operational perspective, reactive versus proactive, I'm sure that's some of the traction stuff about, looking at what you need to be working on versus,
Yes.
Your parking lot and the
Yes.
rocks, if you're going to speak in traction terms, in being reactive versus proactive. I'm sorry, proactive versus reactive.
Right.
How, what do you see in your experience, and then what is Inventory Ally doing to, and other, there's a lot of other services out there, but, from your experience and what you've built, where do you see some of that proactive approach coming into play?
Yeah, I'll talk about it in two fronts. One, I'll just start with kind of operational flow in the hospitals. It's one of the large projects I did before. One thing that stood out to me is that it can be difficult to see sometimes when you're in the thick of it, but oftentimes teams will accumulate bottlenecks. So they'll put bottlenecks in place almost intentionally to try to buffer what might happen.
Sure.
So that's from a reactive versus proactive, right? So to me, to move to a proactive state, you have to have predictability, and you have to have confidence in that predictability. Then you can actually lean into it. But most teams are going to be reactive, and from a reactive state, you put buffer or barriers in place to protect yourself against what might happen.
We have 2 left, let's order 10 more, versus we're not going to need
right.
10 more because it's November and we won't need these until May.
Right. In
Whatever.
inventory, you
And
can
I'm not
buffer it that
clinical,
way.
so I have no idea. But I'm just saying, that's
Right.
I can see that happening based on cyclical
Yeah.
ordering and what's going on.
Well, and on the inventory side, what you'll just to overgeneralize, but the main driver is don't run out, because when we run out, somebody gets mad, patient doesn't get care, right? Things don't work. So it's better to have too much than not enough. So you create a lot of excess. At Inventory Ally, we find that they're carrying 30 to 40% more inventory than they need, and that's actually inflating cost of goods sold on average 2 to 4 points of revenue. So
Okay.
a ton of waste associated with, and it's a result of that buffer that you've created, right?
We
Versus
need
having
it. We need it
predictable-
here, so I got to have it. And then you've just got something sitting on the shelf that you paid for that you're not selling.
That's right. Another example is even scheduling. Oftentimes we'll see hospitals that'll schedule or stop taking appointments at a certain time to create some buffer at the end of the day to get things done they couldn't do throughout the day. But from a process or technology improvement, it keeps that going throughout the day. You actually add capacity because you have
Sure.
predictability. It's another example of it. So really, I try to work with hospitals to start there. what does proactive mean relative to your current reactive, and where do you want to start? Then you start to exercise things like, what do we want to improve? Where is our bottleneck? Now why is it a bottleneck? So like the 5 whys type application, figure out what's actually at the root of that we're trying to solve for.
Sure.
Then how do we want to solve it?
So what was the number you gave again? 30% overstocked on inventory.
Yep.
So for an average, 2 to 3 or 4 vet practice, independently owned, who is out there on their own trying to manage their inventory on whatever process they're doing, what is a $1.8 million practice when you're saying they're 30% over inventoried? What does that mean to them from a revenue perspective that you're seeing at Inventory Ally, or just, your experience going back to Banfield?
Well, not so much a revenue side. It's going to be a cost side, an expense portion of it. So there's 2 pieces that we'll look at. There's a balance sheet, which is total value of inventory on hand. And so there's carrying that excess. So just think of all that inventory on the shelf as dollar bills, right? And on average, so like a $1.8 to $2.5 million.
These books are vaccines and medicines, and they're just sitting here. If I'm not selling them, it's dollar bills sitting there.
That's right, because you put the money into putting them there, but now you're not generating revenue by taking them back off if they sit there too long. And so there's opportunity cost of that cash. Could be put to better use, but there's also waste associated with having that excess. So you spent it and then it expires or it breaks or it's taken off the shelf because there's so much abundance there. So an average hospital is going to see somewhere around $20,000 to $50,000 in excess sitting on the shelf
over the course of a year
in inventory at any given time. At any given time, that costs the money that's sitting, the excess money sitting on the shelf is $20,000 to $50,000.
I mean, that's another
sitting there.
That's a technician.
It's a technician. That's a new piece of equipment. That's right. But the second part of that is,
that's technically owner's money.
It's owner's
money out of your pocket as a practice owner.
Yeah, I'll start that conversation with: is there any equipment that you wish you could buy that you can't, or is there any facility upgrades or improvements that you wish you could do that you can't? Like, you start to unlock that type of potential as well. But the secondary metric out of that is when you have all that excess, that 2 to 4 points of revenue inflation in COGS, that's perpetual.
That doesn't you can't get it off because you just keep doing it.
Yeah, it's all waste. Right? There's other things with COGS that we can start to decrease cost of goods sold with partner alignment and cost structure and pricing structure and a variety of other things there. But just waste, adding 2 to 4 points to your COGS is pretty significant. The third one we look at too, though, is labor.
Labor,
yeah,
okay.
So it was on average, hospitals are spending up to 8 hours a week managing inventory. We try to bring that down to about a 30-minute process 1 day a week. And so you add that up, not only the cost of it, but the opportunity cost of it if they're not seeing patients. It really starts to hit.
So that's $8,000 to $10,000 a year. If you're just doing 8 hours a week at $15 an hour, $20 an hour, you're talking about $8,000 to $10,000 a year, and that's just pure labor costs. You're not talking about benefits, taxes, anything else. Right. So if you're saying $20,000 to $50,000 plus another $10,000 in labor, you're $30,000 to $60,000 in labor and
waste.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, there's your cold therapy laser or brand new ultrasound that you don't even have to finance.
That's right. You add efficiency and predictability to the inventory, and then you can start to unlock the potential. We have one of our early adopters is a mixed animal practice in Kentucky. They had 2 full-time inventory managers. They were running over 40% cost of goods sold, working with the university for 2 years to try to reduce those COGS, could not move the needle. They adopted Inventory Ally in 2 days. In the first month, they dropped to mid-30s, and they're building a second facility. And they went from 2 full-time inventory managers down to 2 hours a week, managing multiple locations. So it's an example of what you can start to unlock.
So that's some of the jumping ahead in my list here. So you're talking about technology and process, right? So you build the process first, you build the technology first, and what happens with that? We just changed a client management system. So in the insurance world, we call it an AMS, which is an agency management system, but it's a PIMS. And so our commission tracking in our old system, when my dad was still here working at the agency, it would take him about 8 hours to 10 hours a month to reconcile our commissions that we would get in, because we don't have cost of goods. We sell insurance and the insurance companies pay us a commission. And so it would take 8 to 10 hours a month to reconcile commissions. And now with our new system, it's maybe that half hour a month.
Yeah.
And so, you just shut and it's not even, I think it's quality of work life for your team members doing that, because that 10 hours of managing inventory or 8 hours a week of managing inventory to a half an hour, they're just not miserable going into work. Like I'm sure there are people who love to do inventory management. Like they like to sit in the office or do that. But, for the employee who maybe that's their number one thing, my dad hated doing it and I did it reluctantly, but, needed to. I'm sure from a quality of life perspective and employee job satisfaction, you see improvements with the practices who implement technology, whether it's inventory ally or anything, developing some of that inventory. So could you talk about inventory technology and process? We put in, we knew our process and technology was terrible. What do you recommend, or what, how do you see that from an operational perspective?
Yeah, it's almost one of those chicken and egg conversations, because you can kind of start from both sides and it depends on what you're looking at. But what I often find, the way I tend to lean, and this is really coming from an inventory ally perspective, if you start with your process and then you look for technology to improve your process, that's assuming you have identified the best process. But if you look for an area of solution and you go find different technologies, it's actually better for you to adopt a technology and modify your process to maximize the potential of that. And that's really what's going to work best, because you think about it, they have brought a technology to you and that's been their sole focus, which is going to enable a component of your job that you might not be expert at. So ideally, you're going to leverage the expertise of what you choose to use, but you should absolutely adopt or modify your process to maximize the potential of that,
the technology.
That adoption.
So to jump in some traction conversation for a second,
Sure.
do you feel that that's why having, a vision organizer, rocks, and parking lot and all these things, so you know what the problems are, so then you can find a piece of technology to solve that problem?
Yeah, the thing I love most about traction is that you set out with some goals and then you focus on those goals and you break them down, right? So you have your rocks and then you have your tasks and you're able to stay focused on it and make sure that you're progressing. So it forces you to focus on something that you want to improve, and it forces you to focus on improving it without getting distracted from everything. Our natural behavior tends to be the flavor of the week.
Yeah.
What's important this week? What's important next week? And we don't actually get things complete. So I'm a huge fan of what are our goals and how are we going to stay focused, and how are we going to work together on achieving those goals? It's not just me.
Yeah.
Because then I'm right. Then I have a headwind, which makes it more complicated. So I've used traction in, I think, 4 businesses now, where I've helped implement it and leverage it. And we have our level 10s every week and we stay very focused, and that allows us to be very successful. I'd mentioned earlier in the conversation, the 5 whys. It tends to be one of the overlays I do. Why do we want to fix this? And what's the barrier? And let's dig into that to make sure that when we go out for find a technology or modify a process or hire a person, it's solving the root cause of what we're trying to actually achieve here.
Otherwise, you're going to spend $1,000 to, say, even if it's just $100, it's $100 a month per seat. We're going to do 1 seat. Well, that's $1,200. And then the technology only did 40% of what you actually needed to do.
Right.
And then you're like, well, this didn't solve the problem because you didn't really understand the root cause of what you were trying, the goal of the root cause.
That's right.
So then when you go to VMX or WVC and you're walking the floor, you can talk to it like, I need this piece of technology to do these 8 things. And if you can only do 7, you're not the right vendor for me. And have those things identified before you walk into the booth and they say, oh yeah, we can fix all these problems, but you don't. I think that's, we get the shiny object syndrome, especially in the insurance industry, because we are integrating a lot of technology, just like every other industry with AI. And so it's easy to get sucked in on that, monthly fee. And then you go, oh, this didn't solve anything.
Yeah. And a really important differentiator, actually, if I say there's one key takeaway from this conversation, it's when you go to have those conversations, go in knowing what the issues are, the root cause problems that you want to solve. Don't go to the conversations with a predetermined solution. When you go in looking for a solution and they don't have it and you write it off, it may actually be a great solution to what you're trying to solve.
Sure.
But you weren't open to it.
Sure.
Very important.
So how does this help with patient outcomes? I mean, we're talking about inventory and back end stuff and back office tasks. How does this impact, and some of these conversations revolving around workflow and inventory process, how does that help with patient outcomes?
Yeah. I'll go through a little series. And you touched on a little bit ago, a lot of frustration. There's still a lot of conversations around burnout and frustration and turnover in the space. So when I back it up to a 30,000 foot level, I've already said earlier, but the long-term success of a business is customers come back and refer their friends. They'll only do that if they have a good experience. And the only way they're going to have a good experience is if the team is highly engaged in that experience they're delivering, right? And so you come one more removed from that. What's causing the team to be frustrated or distracted or overworked? They're not going to deliver a good experience, so you're not going to get that long-term result. So you have to start with that in mind and say, okay, how do we actually start to improve that experience? And technology and process, AI, a variety of different things will help enable them to focus on what they got into vet med for, which is going to reinforce that experience that they deliver, which will generate more revenue, generate more recurring patients, generate more referrals. So that's really where I come at it from. So inventory is one of those things. If you have a lot of stockouts or you're spending a lot of time or you're causing a lot of frustration around it, it's distracting from that desired outcome.
It's interesting because it's one of the things that I'm a big Jim Collins fan. I talk, getting into some books on this podcast. I'm a big Jim Collins fan, and one of the things that he talks about in his series of books is that technology isn't actually you can't use technology to be the catalyst for something. What it can do is actually facilitate. And so it's having that process in mind, and then what piece of technology can help us improve, patient care and patient outcomes. How can it help improve the team? But technology by itself isn't the solution to the problem. It's like buying a better wrench to fix a car.
That's right. It's leverage. It's an amplifier to what you're trying to achieve, but it's not the solution. Agreed.
So if I was at practice today, what are, given your experience dealing with, operations, working with 1,000 practices as you opened up with, efficiencies, what are some of the quickest wins or things that you see or have seen practices implement or integrate that are just some easy, quick wins for them to streamline process, procedure, or, specific to inventory?
Yeah, no, just in general, I like to encourage hospitals to think about what I'd say is your simple economics, which is supply and demand. In our business, supply is the labor service and the demand is the customer's needs. And oftentimes we actually start with the supply in mind when we start scheduling our staff and then try to force customers into that availability, which actually creates a bottleneck that you don't necessarily see. If you can turn that around and say, when do customers want to come through? How can I staff or enable that visibility? You'll actually unlock quite a bit of potential. It's one that I like to speak to because it's generally kind of offset, but put in those terms of supply and demand. Everybody's been through Econ 101 most of the time.
Sure.
So kind of think of it that way. And that starts to unlock a bunch of other things when you start to think about how do I unlock more potential?
Supply and demand, where do we're seeing practices do later hours of like I can't bring my cat in at 5 because I'm here, and I've got
That's right.
For those listening, you can't see the mug. I'm drinking out of a coffee mug that says "The cat loves me best" that my wife gave me because she knows that Louie, my little buddy at home, is my favorite. I'm his favorite guy, but I can't bring Louie into the vet because I'm here at the office until 5 o'clock, and if you only have hours till 6, that gives me 1 hour a day that I can maybe get in there. And we're seeing more extended hours, more Saturday hours till 8 o'clock. And, if you're returning to work, single parent or parent out there, you might want to be there for the kids to get home from school and then go to work from 4:30 to 8. And so it's a different mindset of saying when When is the supply? And for the practices who are doing those extended hours, say, okay, well, we're not going to be open. We're going to have limited scheduling from 11 to 3. We're going to have, we're going to staff, but we're going to staff more from 4 to 8 than we are from 11 to 3 because there just isn't the demand during the day.
That's right. Exactly right. Yeah, because that's good for the customers, it's good for the patients, and it's also good for the staff because you don't overload them at the end of the day because you've been understaffed when there's high demand. Those types of things are important.
So what's on the horizon for Inventory Ally? What do you see coming in?
Sure.
So we didn't chat about this as a kind of a pop quiz question at the end here for you, Emmitt, but what do you see for the future of, inventory and practices, and what is Inventory Ally doing to address some of those?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Well, Inventory Ally is a very unique solution because we actually start with order history data and we monitor and manage consumption patterns versus transactional patterns in the bins, which gives us visibility to everything and we can simplify it all. So we get in a very specific replenishment pattern that's guided to meet the specific needs of every individual hospital. Where we're moving towards is more automated counts and replenishment so we can save more time and effort. Defaulting to preferred suppliers through GPO relationships and others. One of the big things for Inventory Allies, we want to optimize your relationships. You are a service business, and to be a successful service business, you need successful partners to enable you. So one of the things I talk about that is if a patient comes through or an owner comes through the door and says, how much is this going to cost? They've undermined everything about what you have to offer them as a partner.
Sure.
Right? What you really want to do is be their partner for the lifetime of that pet in everything you do, and you're going to charge for that. Similar concept when you're building partners with your business. You need those that are going to look out for you, and you're going to invest in them because they're going to invest in you. So we enable that relationship significantly. We're releasing a new mobile app soon and some other defaults and automations and visibility towards margins and shrink and stuff that's going to really help hospitals out.
Wow. Awesome. So we'll have information in the show notes. If somebody's listening right now and they don't have access to everything, where can they find Inventory Ally? You guys do a lot of the booth stuff at the big national conventions, but where can they find you on the internet? Yeah,
go to inventoryally.com. ALLY. Sometimes we call it Inventory Alley, but it doesn't quite goes the right word. But you're Inventory Ally. Check us out. Book a demo. Happy to chat with you and show you what we have. 2-week free trial, so no barriers to getting it figured out.
No barriers to take a test drive to see how it works for you. Well, Emmitt, I really appreciate our conversation today. Interesting dive into some of the more boring aspects, but I say boring, but when you look at boring, it can get real exciting when you look at the P&L and go, oh man, that was a lot of money I got sitting on the shelf over here for products. And so, I think it's something that a lot of practices struggle with, cost of goods and inventory and relationships and who's going to give me the best deal. And if you just manage some of your inventory, you can increase your bottom line quite significantly, as we chatted about.
Right. Increase your bottom line, put some money in your pocket, and save time in the staff. Lots of opportunities there. We'd love to help you out.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Emmitt, for joining us, and we appreciate your insights.
Thanks, Bill. Great to be here.
All right, listeners, as always, make sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends so we can help share our message of entrepreneurship and business insights to practice managers and veterinarians everywhere out there in the world. Thanks so much for listening, and everyone have a great day.